I'm having one of those tongue-tied sort of days, so I apologize in advance if I trip on my tongue. I also apologize for the stuff on the background, but we live in a tiny house, so those are our hats and our bags and other kind of stuff. I see recurrent questions around the beginning of the freshening season, and I see them often enough that I just thought I would share this video in case it's helpful for others. I want to say we're just 3 years in, so this is not a be-all or end-all by any stretch of the imagination at all. But I did find it very helpful when I was starting out to hear what was working for other people, and that was really helpful for brainstorming. So I wanted to share particularly about the birthing itself and socialization around that period of time, how to get first fresheners to behave well on the stand, how we clean our doughs before pre and post milking, and how we manage bucklings in the doe's barn. We are a dam raised program, and I like that for multiple reasons, but there's certainly validity to every style. So decide for yourself what works for you. This is just brainstorming, food for thought. I would absolutely love to see people talk about their own experiences as well in response to this video, because we're still new and I absolutely love hearing what other people are doing. With that, I'll jump in and start with birthing. I do everything I can to attend every birth. We use baby monitors and the calendar, and I start checking ligaments about 30 days before I expect my first doe to freshen. I'm checking everybody from that point forward. That is because the anatomy is different from goat to goat, and I do not remember 1 month of the year the following year. So if I begin 30 days in advance, I have a couple that are really hard to find, and I've always found them within, a couple weeks. So doing that, as soon as the ligaments are gone, I know I've got 24 hours. The baby monitor is on all the time anyways. In 3 years, I have only missed one birth, and that is because we lost some data in Google Calendar. There is a noticeable difference in those kids. They are substantially shyer of us. That said, I want to say that there's always more than one road to Rome. And so I had a shy doe the previous year, and when she delivered, honestly, she bonded with me during that process. So just because they're shy now doesn't mean that they'll necessarily remain shy. And there are a couple of things that we have done to bring shy goats around in the past. I will try to remember to wrap back to that. But what I wanted to really share about that is how different it is if we're there versus if we're not. We make every possible effort to be at every birth because the first 30 minutes is the time when things can go wrong. They need to get colostrum within 45 minutes. So if I am there, I'm literally counting from the moment a kid hits the ground. And if they haven't had their colostrum within 30 minutes, I pull a little bit from that dough into a bottle directly, and I just give the kid a tablespoon or so that I know that they're good for another hour or two. And then I continue to watch that process. I make every effort I can to ensure that they are latched with their dough because we are a dam raised program. Our very first birth, because it's what everybody told us, we separated that first doe. Her name is Ebony. She is now in her 4th pregnancy, but in her first, we were told you have to separate for birth, and so we did. And she was stressed until the kids were born because she didn't like being on her own. And the other doe was also stressed because she was really, really, really bonded. That was Kiara, super, super bonded with Ebony. In addition to that, when Ebony had delivered and we brought the kids back into the barn, Kiara was really, really aggressive toward those kids. So much so that we put her on the other side of goat panel, but she jumped 48-inch goat panel like I think 5 times. And the final time, and she was pregnant herself, she literally somersaulted going over and just terrified me. So we wound up leaving her in there with them, but she never really became very good with those kids. So when she came due to deliver, I have experience with horses as well, and there are a lot of breeders for horses who just have them deliver in the field. And I have seen that that leads to a very, very cohesive herd. So we decided to let Kiara deliver in the barn, and the difference was night and day. So we thought, okay, that's one experience. Let's see, we'll continue to try that and see how it goes. 3 years since then, every single birth has been in front of the entire herd, and it has been a very, very positive experience. The does will run off somebody else's kids, but that's it. They're just running them off to make sure that they don't try to take milk from them. It doesn't get scary. And we now have a goat herd. Our does at this point, we're over 20. We have a total of 33, and 9 of them are boys. So in a herd that big, if we were going to have issues, we would. By keeping them together, they don't seem to develop massive issues. They each know that that goat belongs to the herd. So if we do, now I will say that we do separate does with their kids for a couple of reasons. I had a doe who was really, really bullied by another doe, and as a first freshener, I separated her. However, from that point, from that first birth on, the way that we separate is just by a panel of goat panel, so they can see each other and they can smell each other. If there's any reason I think the doe might have any problem with the first couple of days nursing, then I put her in that side, and I call that the nursery. I'm gonna yawn, I apologize. But the entire time she can see and smell, and the herd can see and smell her. And I only do that after she delivers. Doing so, the herd has been very, very cohesive. So each doe is totally fine with all the other kids jumping all over her and playing. They're all fine with the kids playing with each other. And the most they do is they will run a kid off if they think they're going to try to nurse, but that's it. They pretty much get along. When they go into heat, they have, a little bit of infighting, and that's it. So we birth in the barn. If a doe had a particularly difficult birth, if a kid is having a little trouble, latching or getting the hang of nursing, or if a doe is really bullied by one other specific doe and a first freshener. Sorry, I am tongue-tied today. Then I will put them in the nursery for a couple of days. The being active, that's not very good grammar. Being active in the birth, I am actually helping the kids latch. These things establish a really good milking relationship. From day one, I bring the does on the stand in the evening. In the morning time, I give them a round pail of grain on the ground with all of their kids there. This has introduced grain to all of our kids. The hay is in one big open feeder since they're all there with a herd from the beginning. The kids eat grain and hay from day one, and grain pretty soon after that. So that by 2 weeks old, the does are on the stand for a morning and an evening milking. They have their kids on them the whole time. While they're milking, we put the kids into the nursery and give them one big meal together twice a day. This has made it very, very easy when the kids need to transition onto grain. They will wean that varies a little bit by bucklings and doelings, and I'll get to that. But especially the bucklings, they will all be weaned fairly early. And the reason, and this will vary for you depending on how many goats you have. What I've noticed over 3 years is the more bucklings we have, the faster they mature sexually. The reason why the bucklings have to be pulled out, I have some vegan friends and they think that it's like a calf-ow, and it's not. It's not even remotely close. The calf-ows simply separate and give an artificial milk so that they can milk out the whole everything that the doe or cow produces. That's not what's going on when people pull the bucklings off the does. Bucklings stand up and immediately begin practicing humping their siblings. They literally stand up, nurse, and start to practice humping. But they are not a pregnancy risk until, and I won't put it in technical terms simply because YouTube will block it, but when the lipstick peeks out, they have to be taken out of the doe's barn. They have to be. If you leave them in there, they can absolutely get their siblings pregnant, and you're talking about that can happen as early as 30 days, depending on how many bucklings you have and how precocious they are. But they definitely egg each other's development on. So the more bucklings you have, the greater the risk of that. The very second you see a tiny bit of lipstick, you have to pull those bucklings out, because getting pregnant at a month old will kill your doelings, which is not vegan friendly. So at that point, you have to pull the bucklings, and here's what we learned by mistake this year. We have one doe who's always losing count of her kids, and she will forget, and she had 4 this year, and so we automatically gave each of them a tablespoon of her own colostrum a couple of days over the first couple days, because I know she has this history and I wasn't sure how she was doing with them. So to ensure that each of them got enough, I was doing that. I had another doe who had really, really large kids, and she was just sort of struggling for the first day. So I gave her kids supplemental bottle for the first 3 days as well. And again, her own colostrum, that's really critical. They will not reject the kids if the kids still smell like them. So by using their own colostrum, they were dam raised. But it allowed me to make sure that they got enough calories in that first day. And that's another reason why we like to bring the does on the stand starting from the first day, even though we don't use the colostrum for anything ourselves. But we keep it, and we keep an eye out. We had one other doe. Everything went beautifully, but her buckling became a pregnancy risk at 5 weeks old. So we pulled him with a buddy, and his dam allowed him to come in for chaperoned nursings for maybe another 3 days, at which point she decided, nah, I'm not nursing you anymore. The issue is he had not received a bottle at birth, and every single kid has their own personality from day one. Some of them will allow you to introduce a bottle even though they haven't seen it. I had like 13 bucklings this year. I got every other buckling on a bottle eventually, except this one. He thought I was trying to murder him with that bottle, even though it was his dam's own milk. So he wound up weaned at 5 weeks old, and I never, ever, ever want to repeat that. What I noticed was each buckling that had a supplemental bottle at birth, they just, one or two of them were like this initially, but as soon as the milk got in there, as soon as the bottle got into their mouth and they had literally a single drip of it, they went, oh, and immediately they took the bottle. I had every one of those bucklings taking a bottle within 6 hours of separating them into the buckling's pen. The other ones that I did get on the bottle, some of them took up to 3 days, but they took the bottle. That's a stressful time for both you and for them. That fifth one, sorry, that not fifth one, that other one who was 5 weeks old never took the bottle. And he wound up being half the size of his peers. Now he seems to be catching up now. I'm not 100% sure if he's going to completely catch up, but he's definitely had a bigger growth curve, and he's not significantly smaller than them anymore. But he was one of the firstborn, and by about 2 weeks after we had to wean him, because he was eating grain, because as I said, we feed it on the ground, but he was not efficient at it. And the other bucklings who did take the bottle, they all just took off and left him on the growth spurt side in the dust. So thereafter, having seen that spectrum this year, because this was our first year of several bucklings, we had 13, I became convinced as we went through that process that from here on out, I will give a tablespoon couple times a day for the first 2 to 3 days, every single buckling that is born here. That establishes them with the bottle. It also means that if anything happens, because we had another buckling who had a traumatic birth. He was born upside down and backwards, and he and his doe sort of half bonded. She was not truly rejecting him, but both of them just literally were always looking at each other like they weren't quite sure. Are you actually my mom? And her at him like, are you actually mine? So she had a doeling who was nursing beautifully, and if he came up and nursed, she would stand for him, but she wouldn't do any nickering or encouraging of him. They were both very, very confused about each other and remained so. So it became clear around 10 days old that while he was nursing a few times a day, he just was not getting enough. And things like this have convinced me that I, even though I prefer the dam raised, want to have a backup ability to give them a bottle if something comes up. So this works for us. By having that one time a day on the stand from day one, we have no issues with milking. The first fresheners do beautifully. They might get a little bit dancy, but it's usually related to the cloth we're cleaning them with being cold, or they want their grain. It's not usually actually like it. You'll hear nightmare stories. We had that in our first season because the does didn't know us yet. But we have not had that even with first fresheners since. The final thing that well, there's two more things. So as far as cleaning the goats go, we use a baby wipe and do the whole udder with one side, flip it and do the teats, strip the teats, and then we use an iodine teat dip in a teat dip cup. We make sure the whole teat is covered, and we give it 60 seconds and then wipe it and proceed to milk. When milking is finished, we use a chlorhexidine teat dip because that causes the teat orifice to close back up, so it greatly reduces the risk of mastitis for the doe. And the final thing I wanted to wrap back to is about the kids that the one birth that we did miss. Those doelings are still very, very shy, but I have found two things that have worked in the past. If we have a goat who's really, really shy, we have used a playpen to bring them inside, tarp underneath them, shavings on top, and bring the playpen right inside, and always bring 2 goats in because they should never be alone. But we have done that and had them stay in the house for 3 to 5 days, just long enough to get really comfortable with us. That has worked, but also when you're there and attend their birth, they're going through a bonding phase, and we had a very, very shy doe who's been a breeze to work with since she delivered. And the final thing I wanted to talk about was we did buy a bottle raised baby. He is actually one of our bucks, and when he got here, he did not want grain. What we finally wound up doing that worked to finally genuinely get him taking grain was when the bucklings moved over to the bucks this year. We give them all the grain in one big round pail, and we put that on the ground. When we did that, he finally began to take grain. So with goats, it's monkey see, monkey do. If you have a goat who's not eating hay or not eating grain, you want a model, and they kind of need to battle it out to get it. It's just the concept that whatever they have must be great. The more goats you can get, that is why with the kids we use one big round pail until they're a certain age. And after that point, they'll eat whatever we give them in an individual serving. I will also say that we use that there's sort of a growth phase up until a year to 18 months, depending on the goat. But you'll start to notice instead of growing, they're actually packing on weight. At that point, we just drop grain. There does seem to be a period. It varies goat to goat, but some of them by a year, some of them by 18 months, they don't need grain. They'll need grain for things like when they're in rut, when they're pregnant, when they're milking, but not every goat needs grain year round. So just keep that in mind. You're looking for body condition score. I think that's it. I just wanted to kind of share a discussion. Like I said, I would absolutely love to see other people's thoughts, feedback, experiences, what's worked for you, what's not worked for you, any questions, etc. Because I find there's always room to do something new, and I find it really helpful to talk to other people doing the same thing.